Good afternoon, folks. My name is Jason Ray. I am the co-founder and CEO at Paperless Parts. Today, we're going to be talking about key pieces of data and how we can build a foundation for success in leveraging new technologies like AI in the manufacturing environment. I'm going to give everyone just about 30 seconds to join in on the webinar. We've got folks piling in right now. And then we'll dive into the presentation. Just some logistics. If you have a question, please submit that question. I would love to hear it. You can do that through the chat. You can also, I believe that's the best place to submit a question. So feel free to pop your questions in there. That could be anything like, I don't understand what you're saying, all the way to, I completely disagree with what you're saying. Explain why you think that's true. And that is totally fine. My biggest goal of every one of these presentations is that if you're spending time watching it, you get value for the time you spent. So my goal is you take away at least one nugget that makes it worth the time. And we'll try to achieve that today. So without further ado, let's dive in. So from my perspective, there are a lot of people out there talking about leveraging AI in the manufacturing environment. And I think that's fantastic. Anytime job shops, contract manufacturers are talking about modern technology, it is awesome. It's the right lens to be looking at the world. And just like anything else, you have to be very careful with how you take the steps to approach a new technology. You also have to understand what you're specifically trying to achieve and the right places to leverage that technology. At Paperless Parts, we frame AI in under two categories. We put it in the subjective AI, and that's the ChatGPTs of the world. That's where you go in, you ask a question, you get an answer. You don't know if that answer is true or not. You don't really know where that answer came from entirely. That's more the subjective AI. And you have objective AI. And objective AI, that's where you go in and you load a piece of information and you get a binary response. Typically, the way we frame it in our platform is moving pieces of information from either a drawing or a 3D model into your paperless parts instance, things that humans would have done before, and they're steps that humans can go back and verify. And that's what we call objective AI. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can set your business up for success. You hear a lot of times the phrase data is the new oil. I think there's something really interesting happening in manufacturing right now, and shops are starting to focus a lot more on their data. So when we first started in this industry, we first started having these conversations well back in 2014 before starting the business. A lot of shops were focused on becoming the cleanest, the tightest shop floor, the most efficient. And they were trying to go from looking like the shop on the left to looking like the shop on the right, being a place that people wanted to work, a place that they were comfortable bringing customers in. It's at the end of the day, where do you want to work and who do you want to do business with? You want to be in the shop on the right. And obviously, I used AI to create the image on the left because shops don't look like this anymore. But some of the first shops that we went into when we were starting this business, it was pretty bad. Pretty bad. I think this industry has modernized significantly. And now you're starting to see most of the shops in the industry are really buttoned up. I think data is the new frontier. That said, we're seeing a lot of big claims about AI, how AI is going to transform manufacturing, going to change the way people do business, going to remove jobs. And I think a lot of these big claims are tied to a hype cycle that we're starting to reach the peak of inflated expectations. That's not to say you should not be thinking about how you should use AI in your business. It's just saying, I think we should be very, very targeted as an industry in how we're going to leverage this technology to be most successful and most impactful without creating unnecessary risk. Here's what's happening when you don't focus on building a core foundation. And I believe data and the data structure in your business is the foundation that you need to employ technologies like artificial intelligence to drive positive return on investment, to drive secure actionable results for your business, when you skimp on building the foundation the right way, the whole thing comes and topples over. And that's why I put this image in here. This is a building in China. They didn't focus on building the foundation the right way, and the thing fell over. So, what are the biggest opportunities for AI in your business? It's a question that I always like to ask people just to understand how they're thinking about the technology. When we step it back and what we're seeing from our customers today, this is really the landscape. So, customer support. Can you use AI to help with your customer support? Yes, absolutely. We at Paperless Parts, we're thinking about constantly how do we leverage AI to go in, read our help docs, answer questions for customers, make it easier for them to self-serve, get their answers back. You can do the exact same thing as your customers are wondering what the status of a quote is or what the status of a part is going through your shop floor. You may be able to use AI to automate those responses back to your customers. We're seeing a lot of AI going into QA, automated bubbling of prints. We're working on some of that technology ourselves. Programming parts. You're seeing a lot of companies like Toolpath and CloudNC come in and try to drive more of artificial intelligence to remove steps that the humans have to take. Finance. We're seeing an enormous number of AI tools pop up to do accounts receivable management, automatically calling or emailing your customers when it's time for them to pay you to make sure that you're getting paid on time. These are all pieces that are starting to come to fruition. I'm not gonna drone on about each of these, but these are all areas where we're seeing AI start to get applied. That said, I think we have to start with data. And I want to be really clear. I think data and information are two different things. Data is the raw, structured points that then you use through analysis to drive information. And the information is what you use to inform your decision-making process in your shop. A lot of people try to skip steps and they try to say, well, I've got a ton of data and that's amazing. And now I'm going to go strategically do this based on the data. And it's like, wait a second. First thing we have to do is turn the data into information. So it has to be structured in a way that we can understand specific trends, specific, whatever question it is you're trying to ask, you need to be able to answer that with the data that you are using in your business in a structured way. So that's what we're going to talk about right now. I think setting your shop up for the future comes down to how you structure your data. And a lot of shops today, they live in a prison that they built. And what I mean by that is the prison they built is the way they've adopted their ERP system. And it's 18 years of historical information that's been typed into their ERP system by a variety of different folks in a variety of different formats that make it nearly impossible to gain information from the data to then drive strategic decision making. So what we're going to focus on during this webinar is 5 key pieces of data. We're going to focus on accounts and contacts. We're going to focus on raw materials. We're going to focus on work centers, rates, and then purchased components. And I'm going to give you a little bit of advice, at least my perspective, on what we're seeing the most successful shops do to standardize their data architecture in their business. And I'm telling you, this is something that you can invest in and you can do if you set your mind to it in a matter of a quarter. So in 1 quarter, you can clean up your historical data. We have shops that have done it with interns. We have shops that have done it with co-ops. We have shops that have had folks just work overtime and plow through it and update their data to make sure that their data is consistent. I think it is a well worthwhile endeavor to go down that path to make sure that your business can turn data into information to drive your strategic decision making. So let's dig in. This is a real shop's accounts and contacts list when we first started working with them. So what you're seeing here is I have the exact same company written in numerous ways, which makes it nearly impossible for me to understand my customer concentration, to pull information about how that customer is performing, how we're expanding in that customer. Makes it very, very difficult. This is typical when we come in and start working with a shop. Their contacts and accounts list is a complete mess. This yields really weird information, really weird analysis. Just by looking at this, I might say, okay, well, BAE is a bigger customer than Raytheon. And I'm doing more business with BAE. I can see that with BAE Systems PLC. They're the biggest. And that might just drive a differing behavior on my sales team. It might drive a differing approach for how I quote them, how much margin I build into my quotes, you name it. I might also say, well, one of these BAEs is a bad customer for us. Or someone looking quickly at the data that's not looking at it in this format might just say, man, BAE Systems never buys from us. And that's because they're just looking at this one piece of information. And so when you clean it up, you get a much clearer picture of what's actually happening in your business. And I'm not saying you might not want different divisions of each of these companies broken out, but you should have a really intentional approach to how you structure your accounts and how you tie the contacts in each of those accounts to that specific company. Because I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the first things someone will ask you when they come in to try to buy your business is, what does your customer concentration look like? If you cannot answer that question very simply, and if you cannot pull that data, how many quotes are we sending? What's our win rate? What's the performance by this specific customer? You're going to be in a really tough position. So I always start with the very basics. Clean up your accounts and contacts. Make sure that you know that contacts are still with those accounts. If you're going to do email marketing, you need to have a good list of all of the contacts. It's absolutely critical. Now let's talk about raw materials. This is a dramatically more complicated, difficult problem. But this is, again, real data out of a shop's accounts or out of a shop's material database. And you can see you just have different estimators entering in different ways. The ERP systems did not make this easy. So one thing just to step back on, software is really hard. It is incredibly difficult to make a software system that structures data that is a broad enough tool that it works for a broad enough swath of the market to build a sizable company. So what software companies end up doing is they compromise and they say, well, materials, I want my ERP system to work for metal providers, plastic providers, textiles. I want to have the mattress company be able to use my ERP system. So what they do is they step back from a data structure and they just give you a description field that's somewhere between 35 and 55 characters. And then it's on you to be really disciplined with how you use that description field. What we find is most companies have a general approach to how they do it, but then it starts to get a little wonky when there are certs or when it's, I have to go buy it from a specific company that is, going to extrude it. It's a little bit of a different type of material. And I would encourage you to step back and be incredibly intentional about how you are thinking about your materials. So this is one example of how you might do that. And this is having material, an alloy, a grade, the form factor. So is this a sheet? Is it a bar? Is it extrusion? What are the dimensions of that material? And then where am I buying it? What's my code for who I'm purchasing it from? Or maybe you leave that out because you say, hey, I just want to be able to filter on the first pieces of it. But coming up with a really intentional way to do this, and then going back through all of your data and restructuring all the materials to comply with this format will allow you to move much more effectively and seamlessly when analyzing what parts do we win more of? Where can we nest parts inside the same piece of material, whether that's based on a sheet and the gauge of the sheet, or if that's I'm making turned components and they're bar fed. And oh, by the way, I could go buy 2 different bars of this, or I could bulk buy the larger gauge or the larger diameter bar. And now I can, I'm having a little bit more scrap, but I'm going to save it on the back end because I'm having a bulk buy. just simply being able to look at the world in a structured way, run an analysis in that structured way, is going to inform decisions you make. We're all stepping into uncharted, maybe some of you have charted these waters before, but fairly uncharted waters as it relates to tariffs. Material prices are fluctuating. People are trying to be hyper responsive, and everybody's getting a little bit of whiplash right now. The best thing you can do is be disciplined and set up your database to understand where's my exposure. You should be able to today go out and quickly pull a report that shows you all the different types of material that you've quoted in the last 60 days. How many of those quotes are outstanding? How many of those quotes are now at risk because of specific fluctuations in material pricing? And that should be an easy thing to go back and update. If you're sitting there and you're like, man, this would be a freaking nightmare to go back and update this materials or the materials on all of my quotes. If I needed to go back and rev all of those, it's a little bit of a, trying to decode use the Enigma machine. That's a problem. We should get it in a structured format. This also sets you up for success when running a multi-site organization. When you have multiple sites, and we work with an enormous number of PE buyers. I think it's over 50 different private equity-backed organizations with thousands of sites. You step back and you look at this, you say, okay, well, one of the core underlying theses that these private equities are going out and buying shops under is we're going to gain economies of scale. So we're going to bulk purchase everything. We're going to move all the jobs that can be run in a very similar way under one of the sites, and we're going to move other jobs to the other site. Well, that starts with having a common data architecture across the sites so that now you can say, this site's about to buy this aluminum bar, this site's about to buy the same one, let's buy them together and let's get a better price on that. It's just having clarity where clarity doesn't exist today. It makes it a lot easier to see the data and understand what's going on and why certain things are happening. It also gives you the ability to run analytics on that data. So if you're losing because of a specific type of material, if your win rate or your order quantities are low, I'll tell you a story. We had a customer in California. When we first released our analytics module, we went in, we started looking at his win rates by materials. Turned out his win rate for titanium was through the floor. Ridiculous. He did not win when he would quote that. And we said, do you know this? Probably in the back of your mind, you know that you're unlikely to win those quotes, but you're still sending out dozens of them every month. So what's going on here? It forced him to step back and really dig in and realize that the way he was calculating cycle times for titanium, because he didn't produce parts out of titanium that often, was way off. And that's the type of turn data into information, do something about it. That's the approach that we want to take here. This is just showing all the different ways you can slice and dice this data to learn more based on what your shop is already doing. Work centers. So I'm going to tell you a story. We had a customer, and that customer had two work centers. They had lowercase machining and they had uppercase machining. And we went through during the onboarding process and we started interviewing the estimators, and we're like, all right, why do you use uppercase machining and you use lowercase machining? And we're in different meetings. We talked to each one separately. And one of them said, well, I use uppercase machining because you're not allowed to use lowercase machining. And the other one said, I use lowercase machining because you're not allowed to use uppercase machining. And then we went and we talked to the folks that were doing order entry and set up on the shop floor. And they're like, yeah, anytime we see lowercase come through, we just convert it to uppercase because they're just making a mistake in estimating. Turns out lowercase machining was actually the one you shouldn't be using. You should be using uppercase. And uppercase machining had a $135 rate versus a $50 rate for lowercase. They were winning quotes for over a year at lowercase machining at the wrong rate, and they didn't know it. And you may be like that never happens, or, oh, that's ridiculous. We would have caught that. I'm telling you, because the feedback loops in these shops are not tight, and because people just get on autopilot doing what they do, you end up making huge mistakes. This list, we didn't make this up. The Bob Station, CNC number one, back corner, this is a real list. New saw versus old saw. This is not the way to set your shop up for success. There's too much tribal knowledge in the way these work centers are named to make you successful going forward. So we recommend coming up with a structure. Again, you may have a completely different structure. It may be a mill, it might be a lathe, you might have a laser, you might want to include different information. You might have the wattage instead of the axes, but come up with a structure so that when you are looking at scheduling, when you are trying to understand where parts could be run or why they should run on certain machines in certain facilities, it gives you so much more clarity. We included type of machine, axes, and envelope to start because we said, look, this is going to go on a mill. We want to know where the mills are. Axes, because we know the setup directions. We know how many setups. So that's going to disqualify certain machines quickly. Then we include the envelope because depending on the size of the part, it can't fit on certain machines. Then we look at tools because we're looking at the features and we're like, man, if we don't have enough of a tool crib here, we don't have enough tools where we're going to have to be going in and changing it out based on the complexity of the part. Okay, well, that's the wrong machine to run it on. This is a basic example, but force yourself to think through how you structure this data in your work centers so that you can gain a lot of clarity in both estimating, you can eliminate the mistakes, but also in your scheduling, understand which assets. I had a phenomenal conversation with a customer yesterday who was talking about trying to make the decision on tonnage on a press brake. He's like, I'm using Paperless for that. He's like, we've structured it, we're looking at it, and now we can understand how many parts would require certain tonnage so I know where to make my next investment based on what I'm quoting today. That is just one basic example on how structuring your process, understanding what your shop is doing, collecting the data points, turning it into information allows you to make a strategic decision. If you always see a diameter of bar and your win rate is low or high for certain things, or you're no quoting all the time, maybe that's the next piece of equipment you need to invest in. If you always lose jobs where certain work centers are included in the router for that job, if you're always losing every time Bob's machine shows up, why? What's going on there? I think that is just, it gives you a new way to look at and understand the matrix. It's just a way you can break it out. Let's talk about shop rates. So I see varying degrees of shop rates when we go into shops. Some of them are a blanket rate. It's our shop is $100 an hour, no matter what you're doing. I could be deburring a part or I could be running it on a 5-axis. That is like one end of the spectrum, all the way to gap compliance rates based on each machine, based on utilization of energy, based on depreciation schedules, you name it. What I'm going to show you is a little bit in the middle. It's not gap compliance. It's just helping you think through your rates. The way we look at rates, or the way I look at rates, is I want to know what's my hourly break-even rate. That's what I want to know. If I'm going out, I'm buying a machine, I'm looking at the total cost of the machine plus the interest. I'm looking at that divided by a payoff period. So if I buy the machine for $100,000 and I'm also then going to pay another $30,000 in interest over the next 5 years on it. So now I've got $130,000 and I want to make sure this machine is fully paid back by the 5th year. It's like, okay, well, that means I need to make $26,000 a year. And then I'm going to spend another $4,000 a year on maintenance. So now I've got $30,000 a year. Well, now I need to divide that by the annual expected utilization hours. So let's talk about this for just a second, because I think I think as entrepreneurs, shop owners are very optimistic. I'm an optimistic person. I always believe that the best case scenario is going to play out, and that's the tilt that I joust the world with. And so at the end of the day, we'll talk to shop owners that are hyper unrealistic in their optimism about what their actual annual expected utilization is. I will ask a shop, what's your capacity utilization? And they'll say 70%. And I'll say, oh, that's amazing. So you're running 3 shifts. And they'll say, no, I'm running one. And I'll say, oh, interesting. So you've got robots and pallet loaders and you're running lights out. And they'll say, no, we're just running 1 shift. And I'll say, well, how are you running at 70% utilization if you're only running 1 shift? And it's kind of like a long extended silence. If you're running 1 shift, you'd be lucky to be getting 1,000 hours. 1,000 hours out of 8,700 a year. You're lucky if you're getting that on 1 shift. So be really clear about what you expect to utilize that machine at so you know what your hourly break-even rate is. Just be honest about it. So if you're sitting there at 1,000 hours and you have a $30,000 machine, that is $30 an hour, right? 30 times 1,000. So that's your break-even rate. Now that might not be the rate you charge. You might want to loop in electricity cost. You might want to put other things into that. But it is at the very least, is giving you a foundational way to think about your rates. I would encourage you to be really candid with yourself on the payoff period. That does not necessarily need to coincide with your loan. It needs to coincide with when that technology is likely going to be outdated. What we've seen over the last 8 years is that the pace of manufacturing technology, the actual hardware, the machine tools, has accelerated dramatically. The quality, the pace, the technology in them, you don't want to be riding an old machine unless it's a unique capability, and they're obviously going to be edge cases, so we can do the stump the chump. But at the end of the day, you want to plan to make sure you have enough money coming in where you can go and invest in that next new piece of technology. I think this concept alone is the reason, one of the primary reasons you saw a lot of the additive manufacturing service bureaus go out of business. And it's because they thought their 3D printer would keep them at the forefront for 5 years. And in reality, it was more like 18 months from when it landed on their floor, on their shop floor. Because then there was a new piece of equipment that had a faster build and worked with different materials and had better tolerances and had better in situ process monitoring. And at the end of the day, by the end of the 18 months, their technology was outdated. They weren't generating the amount of money they needed per hour in order to go out and invest in the new technology, and the Service Bureau went under. And so, I mean, you can beat this as a dead horse. I'm not telling you that this is the right way to think about rates. What I'm telling you more is you should come up with how you want to do rates in your shop and be really intentional about a few pieces. How much are you going to use that machine? And when do you need to have that machine paid off so you can start accumulating money to invest in the new piece of equipment? Purchase components. I'm fairly binary when it comes to buying things externally. If you are going out and you are buying a part from an OEM, a fastener, use their part number. So if I'm going to Penn Engineering and I'm going to buy a PEM component, I'm going to use the PEM component number. I think a lot of times shops try to get too cute with coming up with their own part numbers. I've seen shops re-part number parts that they are making for their OEMs. So they will be making a Boeing part. They will change that part number for when it goes out to their shop floor. They'll change all the fasteners or all the hardware to be something else internal to them. All you are doing is creating a matrix and a lookup table that is a complete nightmare. And it may slightly make your operation easier so you're all speaking the same language, but I would argue the juice is not worth the squeeze there. Just use the part numbers that the OEMs use. It makes it easier to go out and request a quote from DB Roberts, Swaco, whoever you're buying hardware from, if every piece of hardware in your ERP system is tied to the OEM, meaning the person who made that hardware, specific part number. That's my big recommendation. And put it in their format. Don't get rid of the dashes. Don't mess around with it. Put it in the format. So when your procurement team or your purchasing team goes out to try to buy it, or you're going out and conducting inventory to see what you have on the shop floor, when you are doing that, it needs to be easy. And this is the easiest methodology that we've seen shops take. The punchline here is you need to lay a very, very stable foundation before you start building the building. Because if you don't, the building's going to fall over. And it may not fall over this year, it may not fall over next year, but it's going to hold you back from taking advantage of the most modern technology, like the AI that everybody is talking about right now. If you do not get your data in a format that allows you to turn that data into information to then drive your strategic decision making. That was 30 minutes. I tried to go pretty quickly because I want to be conscious of your time and make sure you get some value from this. I will hold here for any questions. You're also more than welcome to email me with any questions that you have. I hope this was valuable. I'd love to get your feedback. And if there are topics you'd like us to cover or like us to dig in on, we'd be happy to do that as well.